Well, Brother Rob, welcome.
Thanks, Uncle.
Uncle, that was immediately cruel. I was going to point out that if in fact we were related and we're not, and you are my younger brother, you'd be taller, more sporting, more handsome and more accomplished, thereby triggering a lot of sibling rivalry. But there's no relation, but lots of good things to talk about tonight. We might start back in Perth in Western Australia. Growing up, both your parents were teachers and you spent some time in regional Western Australia before going back and finishing your schooling in Perth. But the chancellor's already mentioned your rowing. There's a story about you picking up rowing at the end of school and you wanted to row in the famous schoolboy regatta, the Head of the River. What happened with that?
That's right, Mark. So I went to a state school in Western Australia, Rossmoyne Senior High School, and myself and a few friends took up rowing at a club, and we were going all right, and we said, well, let's enter into the Head of the River, quite naively. And then we were told very clearly that, well, no, you're not allowed to compete because you're from a state school. I took it the wrong way. Turned up to the state team trials and somehow made my way into the state team. So my whole rowing career really was just because I had a chip on my shoulder.
Well, that chip took you a long way because, you know, in 3 years' time, when you were 21, you were in an Olympic final in Barcelona in the eights. And then 4 years after that, a silver medalist at the Games in Atlanta. You're now CEO of one of Australia's biggest corporations. Tell us how you reflect on your years in elite sport as a preparation for being a CEO.
Well, I guess reflecting on my time in sport, first of all, I recognise how lucky, fortunate, it is a real privilege to be able to represent your country in sport and to have all the support around you to do what you love. So I always am very thankful for that opportunity. I guess what's really unique about it, and it's probably the same in any elite sport, you are surrounding yourself by around people that every day they wake up trying to be the best in the world. Now, they might not always be successful, but every single day you're surrounded with people with that sense of ambition. And there's a bit of a drug to it. It's quite addictive in terms of that feeling. So when I finished sport or competitive sport, or after the Olympics in '92, I felt I had to find something to fill that gap. And for me, being a team sport person, I had to find a team that shared that sense of aspiration about trying to do something special.
Let's just stick with rowing for a bit. There are some who say that rowing is a great preparation for business. You can't see where you're going, right? But apart from that, the discipline of being in a team, you know, you're all in it together. You started off in the eights, then you won the silver medal in the pairs. But what do you learn about teamwork and having to get on with others, whether they're your mates or not, or whether in fact they're performing at the level you want to or not? What did you extract from that?
Well, I guess like a few things. Rowing's one of those great sports that individually you need to put yourself through such incredible pain and stress just to compete. But then somehow you need to find a way of meshing that together with others and doing it at the same time and finding this very elusive rhythm that will actually make the boat go far. So it is, you know, I do believe it's one of the ultimate team sports. I guess you learn a few things. For me, you learn that being in a team is about creating an environment where everyone can operate at their optimal. You learn the benefit of diversity in teams. A big lesson for me in the '92 Olympics was we had the East German and the West German teams combine for the first time, and they should have won by about 3 or 4 lengths. They were that good. But just watching the body language and how they went around the regatta, it wasn't surprising that they didn't perform at their expectations. So I guess it's about creating an environment where you can get the best out of everyone.
You won silver in the '96 Olympics. I've heard some sports people say they'd rather not have a medal than have a silver medal. How do you, you know, because they're so competitive and so goal-oriented, how do you think about silver? Now, we should point out there's a gold medal at home, though, shouldn't we?
Well, thanks for reminding me about that. Yeah. So, like most people would be pretty happy with a silver medal, but when your wife has a gold medal, it just actually shows you what a great judge of talent I am.
So what did you learn from the silver?
Well, I guess every step in the way, for me at least, it was whenever you've achieved something, well, look, that's all in the past. You want something more. I always wanted to have an objective, a goal. So as soon as I'd achieved something, it was, well, let's not sit around congratulating yourself on it. Let's get on and find the new thing. So you make a team, then you want to make the Olympic team. You make the team, you want to make the final, and then you make the final, and then you want to win a medal. And there's always this elusive thing you're after. So, look, for me, myself and Dave Waitman, my partner, we were bitterly disappointed we won a silver medal because we wanted to win. And I guess, like it probably sounds a bit cliched now, but looking back, it took us a long time to get over it, but you do look back and you say, well, look, really at the end of the day, what matters is the experience you went through, what you got out of it, the fact that there is still that little bit of hunger left in you that you didn't quite win. I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. It drives you to do more. But for me, the definition of doing more and achieving more, it is always as part of a team. I started off rowing in a single scull, but I found that the sense of excitement and joy I had from being part of a winning team was what really made it all the more worthwhile.
There are some leading sports people who become leaders in society, be it in politics or business or the professions, but it's not necessarily common. Some people, having had that adrenaline moment, that is the high point of their life. How systematically did you have to plan and think through your transition off the water to life beyond?
Well, one of the good things about being a rower is the pay's lousy. So you have to study, and you have to find a way to work, and that helped. That helped, I guess. And I was one of the rowers that I loved rowing, but I couldn't just spend my whole day thinking about rowing. I needed something to keep my mind stimulated, and I guess I had this work ethic drilled into me with two parents being teachers. Look, for me, I think it was just a practical reality of I had to get a job. I had to get a job. If I was going to get a job, I wanted to do something I enjoyed. I wanted to work with people and an organisation that inspired me and gave me energy, and that's really what got me into Wesfarmers after the Olympics.
So an opportunity opened up with Wesfarmers, and what did you first do there?
Well, I came back after the '92 Olympics, and as a lot of you would remember, we were pretty much in recession then. So as a commerce economics graduate, it wasn't easy to get a job, especially in Perth, off the back of WA Inc. and so forth. And I had put applications in for a number of jobs and been knocked back. My university results were, I'd call them mixed.
The room finds that encouraging, I think.
And I was always a bit sensitive of that at Wesfarmers until my chairman told me that he'd failed a couple of units as well, so I felt a lot better. I don't know if I should have shared that. He's gone on to do all right.
Yeah.
There was an opportunity that actually Ernst & Young had set up to try and support Olympic athletes getting jobs. It was a great program, and I think I was the one Olympic athlete with a degree in Western Australia. So,
hello to all the viewers in Western Australia watching the stream.
So Ernst & Young, I think, called on a favour of one of their one of their audit clients, Wesfarmers, to say, look, can you meet with this young guy? He's got a commerce degree. We don't really know how good he is, but he can row very fast. And Mike Chaney decided, well, look, I'll meet with him. And so my very first job interview was with Mike Chaney, the new CEO of the time at Wesfarmers. Yeah. And as you know, Wesfarmers is famous for community and philanthropy, and I think I was a bit of a charity case in terms of getting the job. And I got a job in the finance team of Wesfarmers, and it was part of the deal was they would give me time off so I could keep training for the '96 Olympics. So I was very fortunate to be given the opportunity through Ernst & Young and Wesfarmers.
And you spent some time with them, and then you got into corporate finance, M&A, time here, time in Asia. It's interesting, a number of the CEOs we've interviewed over the years have spent time in professional service firms or in banking before going back into operations and being a CEO. What did you learn from your time out of Wesfarmers?
Look, I think a few things. I think if you're in advisory consulting roles, you get an incredible exposure to different businesses, different problems. You're working with very smart people, very driven people. For me, I enjoyed the diversity of experience internationally, experiencing different companies, cultures, problems in business. So you just learn an incredible amount. For me as well, I also got to the point where I was really interested observing culture and observing ways of working. And I got to the point where I kept reflecting back on Wesfarmers and saying, well, look, I love what I'm doing. I love the problem solving. I love facilitating outcomes. I love working with clever people. I'd rather not be a banker. In fact, what I'd really like to do is go back and work at Wesfarmers. So I wrote Mike a letter and said, Mike, remember me.
Not rowing quite as fast, but still.
That's right,
yeah.
That's right. So that's really what led me back to Wesfarmers.
Do you ever reflect on whether, in fact, you would have got the CEO job if you'd been a lifer?
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, something I think everyone's starting to realise a lot more now as businesses try to create more flexible work environments. I think everyone's recognising now, but they should have recognised it a long time ago, that most career developments are not necessarily smooth, linear paths. And mine certainly wasn't. And I was what I guess I was fortunate with was, first of all, having a diversity of experience, and also actually working with some organisations that were prepared to provide me with flexibility. So the fact that Wesfarmers provided me with flexibility to go off and go to training and go off to competitions, the fact that Ernst & Young provided that support. For a while I worked with Deutsche Bank and they did a similar thing. So I think it was, all I know is it is the only way that I could have achieved what I've achieved to date. And I think interestingly, we look around now and when we think about career development and pathways, I think those old-fashioned paradigms of you just keep stepping up in a very linear path, I think that's not as relevant nowadays.
I'm really interested when you look at your experience when you went back to Wesfarmers in 2004, just the range of experiences you had. You were MD of Wesfarmers Insurance, Financial Director of Coles, MD of Financial Services and then Industrials. Very broad range of experience and clearly a terrific apprenticeship for the job you have now. To what extent were you planning that, and to what extent do you feel people had their eye on you and they were systematically developing you by giving you that broad experience?
Well, I guess one of the great things about working at Wesfarmers is that there are the opportunities come along and you don't really know what those opportunities will be, but you do know that opportunities will arise. And from the outside, people might think that we're incredibly organised and our succession planning is highly structured. And look, we do try and be a bit organised and structured with it, but a lot of the opportunities come about through relationships that you build, outcomes that you develop, and then when opportunities come along, they come a bit from the blue, out of the blue. And that was certainly the opportunity when I had the opportunity to move into the insurance division. It was very simply having a discussion with Richard Goyder at the time, and Richard just said, Rob, I want you to run the insurance division. And I think what is fortunate about Wesfarmers is that they are prepared to back people who might not have had a specific industry experience and giving them opportunities. And in fact, if you look back over the history of Wesfarmers, that's how we've often driven quite disruptive change within businesses. You can look at Guy Russo, the move from McDonald's to Kmart. You could also argue John Gillam going from running the chemicals business to running Bunnings. The opportunity I had to go into insurance. I think that's the great thing about Wesfarmers.
I read recently the book by Robert Iger, the famed CEO of Disney, and he talks about being an insider and getting the CEO job, and gives an amazing insight into what it's like to land the CEO job. He talks about 15 different interviews with the board and board directors, a long, kind of quite tortuous process where he was almost running a political campaign, identifying his strategy and the directors he needed to work on and where the votes were. How do you get to be a CEO? Tell us about your recruitment process.
Well, all I know is in a Wesfarmers context, and the one thing I know for certain in a Wesfarmers context is the more choreographed and structured and political you were, the less successful you would be. And that is the nature of our culture and organisation. And there is no manual for how it works, but what you learn from being part of the group and understanding the culture and observing other leaders is there are certain behaviours and ways of working that are valued. So commercial outcomes are valued. So we talk about three things in our leadership criteria, I guess. There's being commercial is really important, engaging people, and that relates at different levels, and then delivering results. I guess you look at someone like Richard Goyder that was appointed CEO many years ago. He was not the loudest person around the table. He was quiet, considered, super commercial, steely determination when it was required. We take our job seriously. We don't take ourselves too seriously. We don't, we despise internal politics. So I guess some of those things give you a sense for, you can work out what actually matters. So if you want to get by, you deliver outcomes, you engage effectively, you build relationships through the group, but at the end of the day, you need to deliver results. And I think the way you go about it needs to be consistent with the values and the culture that Wesfarmers has developed over 105 years. So you also realise, and what I realise more and more every day is there is just such a wonderful history and legacy within Wesfarmers, 105 years, and the unique opportunity I have is just to be there for a period of time.
And you've referenced it, but if you think of your two immediate predecessors, Michael Chaney, who's now your chair, and Richard Goyder, very smart, very successful, but quiet, unassuming, very influential. Are you saying that you think that's a Wesfarmers way of leadership? Because people say you have those same characteristics in leadership.
Well, I think there are maybe there are ways of working and certain aspects of style that part of our culture, and perhaps it is part of the history of being what was a rural conglomerate at one stage, a rural cooperative at one stage, and that is there is this sense of being pragmatic, being down to earth, that is very much ingrained in the business. I think also that recognising something we often talk about is the fact that none of us are smart enough to predict the future. None of us really know what's going to happen in the future, but what we do know is that there are a whole lot of things that we can do to set ourselves up to be successful under a range of circumstances. And I think that just those are some of the examples that really go to our culture. And although there might be some consistencies, Richard is a very different person to Michael, who's a very different person to Trevor Eastwood, who's obviously different to me. So the great thing in Wesfarmers is we do value individuality, and we value authentic people.
To some extent, it's such a successful company, but an unusual company in current context in that its activities are so broad. Bunnings, Kmart, Officeworks, an industrial division, chemicals, finance, insurance, as you've outlined. How on earth do you run as CEO across that level of diversity, and how do you think through how you're adding value to each of those businesses?
Well, look, if you think about it in that context, it can be a bit mind-numbing and mind-blowing, I guess. But if you come back to our core purpose as a company, our purpose as a company is to deliver a satisfactory return to shareholders, and we define that as being a better-than-market return over the long term. So everything we do needs to be grounded in that. We have a divisional autonomy model that we believe brings out the best performance in our operating divisions. And that is quite liberating for me as the group CEO, because it gives me a license not to meddle in the operations. And and if you really simplify the nature of my role, there are really only two things that matter. One is, who do I get to run the divisions? And two, how do we allocate our capital? Now, yes, there are a whole lot of other things. Clearly, being the custodian of the organisation's reputation, setting the right tone from the top, values, they are all crucial. But in terms of the two decisions that can have the greatest impact on our group, it is leadership decisions, who's running the divisions, and where do we allocate our capital. And if you simplify it down to those two principles, it actually makes my job a lot simpler.
Given that those divisions operate in a fairly autonomous way, how does your executive team work? Because a lot of executive teams come together to think through, how do we cooperate, how are we collegial, how do we support each other? You can see that the retail businesses may have some in common, but it's quite a disparate portfolio. So what do you focus on when you all come together?
Well, I guess the first thing is that for our operating model to work, for this divisional autonomy system to work, there needs to be an enormous amount of trust. We have to have an enormous amount of trust in our leadership and an enormous amount of transparency. That old saying that bad news needs to flow faster than good news is just crucial. And then it comes back to Wesfarmers' values. So often when we're making leadership team appointments, the people we interview will be super experienced and they'll have great expertise and they'll tick a lot of boxes, but we spend most of our time really trying to make that assessment around values alignment and cultural alignment. So
how do you interview for that? I mean, often they get revealed over time in an interview process. How can you be sure about the value set and how someone's actually going to be when you recruit them?
Well, I guess there's a lot of research you do behind the scenes to get to know people, and we also do involve our leadership team in interviews. So I value the view of my leadership team of people that we interview. We've done more of that recently. So I guess when we come together, look, make no mistake, there are some very strong personalities, there are some very strong views, and we're very protective of divisional autonomy. So unless it goes to an issue that is going to impact our reputation or have major capital implications or risk implications, what the managing director of the division says goes, and I won't stand in the way. But accountability means that they need to live with the consequences of their decisions. So I guess when we all come together, I'd like to think, and I do observe as a leadership team, that there is an alignment around values, there's an alignment around our ultimate corporate objective, and we really use the thinking that we collaborate a lot, we help each other when it matters, but we only really focus on the things together that are going to make us deliver a better outcome. Not collaborating for the sake of collaborating. Not doing this because it's a nice thing to do. We respect the autonomy of the divisional managing directors, but interestingly, they are so anxious to improve the performance of their divisions. The culture is that it has to be a continuous improvement environment. So what I'm observing at the moment with our leadership team is they're quite hungry to actually share insider knowledge, but also very respectful of their job at hand.
Shortly we're going to go to the floor. These are all just the easy questions. The tough ones come from the alumni and those online. I'm just kind of getting your eye in on these things. The divisions are autonomous, but they're not autonomous from you. So to what extent do you engage with them? I mean, do you head to Bunnings on a Saturday morning, buy something at the Sausage Sizzle, and do you have a view as you're walking up and down the aisles of Bunnings? And do you communicate that view back to the CEO of Bunnings?
Oh, look, I absolutely do. We joke about customer feedback data point 1, and that's my feedback from the Claremont store on Saturday morning. That the managing director of Bunnings, Mike Schneider, is delighted to receive every Saturday. So look, and having worked in retail businesses, I'm used to receiving the emails from the management or the directors on why the shelf was empty or what happened. But look, I think you can't help but engage in the business and have a view. But I think you also need to be very respectful that We have very big businesses, very complex businesses. We need to give our leadership team freedom to operate. We also need to respect that when you're running a business with over 100,000 team members, operations in every community across Australia, not everything's going to go right all the time, so mistakes will happen. So, look, I try to be balanced about how the feedback works, but I think it is important for all of us to actually be engaged with our business and understand what's going on.
You talked about capital allocations. One of the big decisions on your watch, of course, was the, in a sense, divestment of Coles or moving Coles out of the core part of the business. Just how big a call is it for you when you finally got to develop that proposal and take that to the board? Because it was such a key and important part of your business, and you now have a much smaller share of it now.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because a demerger, like the demerger of Coles, is incredibly complicated. And as you could imagine, we have many advisors giving us all this great advice on what we should do. But for myself and for the board, really it just came back to, if we wanted to deliver on our corporate objective, which was to deliver a superior return to shareholders over the long term, then it was the obvious thing to do. And I think it's a real credit to our board. There are not many boards out there that are happy to shrink the size of their business. Coles is a fantastic business, it's an iconic business. But when the management team, myself and others, set out the plan for, we think this is the right thing to do because it meets the objective of Wesfarmers, and this is why we think it does. The board was, they challenged us. There was a lot of challenge, a lot of questioning, a lot of detail behind the decision making, but ultimately it was quite an obvious decision to make because it was clearly the right thing for shareholders, even though we were materially decreasing the size of the group.
Did it send a message to to your executive team too, that really, and everything's on the block for you? You will sell what you need to sell, you'll buy what you need to buy, but you're really active in a transactional way around these companies that you run.
Well, I think there's a time and a place for a lot of things, and if you look at the history of Wesfarmers, the one constant in Wesfarmers' history has been change. And one of the great things with our conglomerate model is that it gives us the capacity to keep adjusting our businesses and our capital to ensure that it remains relevant in the industry, in the market that we operate in. So it had been a while since we had made any significant portfolio changes. If you think about from the date that we bought Coles in 2007, so much had changed in the markets we operate. Technology was having a profound impact on many businesses and industries. And for us, as a group, it just felt like the right time to make a few changes, to demerge Coles, to reallocate our capital, to exit our coal mining businesses. And I think all of us as a leadership team were quite inspired and engaged then, because we now have 4 fantastic divisions that are leaders in their respective markets. We can deliver good returns on capital, generate great cash flows, which are important for all of you shareholders out there for dividends. And there's a lot we can go after. So it created a bit of oxygen, I guess, in the group to get on with new things.
All set to go to the floor for questions, so just be ready in a minute. You said that you manage for the long term. We live in a very short-term world. Media reporting, analysts' expectations. Just talk about how you manage the tension between long-term value for shareholders and short-term noise and pressure. Do you watch the share price each day?
I do look at it each day. I try not to, but it's all over the place.
It lures you in.
It lures me in. But I think I guess a couple of things. I think what I've noticed is one of the most important things you can do as a CEO is learn to say no and to resist the pressure to do things for the sake of being seen to be doing things. And once again, I'm really fortunate to inherit a legacy in Wesfarmers of the long-term focus, and it grounds all of our decisions. We are fortunate to have 50% of our share register are retail shareholders with a very long-term focus that generally support us. So long as we continue to pay a good dividend and are seen to be doing the right things, they will back us. So that is very fortunate. But I think you do need to work really, really hard to resist the temptation to do things for the short term.
So we might now go to the floor and turn up the lights a bit and see if there are questions from the floor. We immediately have a question if the microphone can come down the front. And if there are any other questions, just give me a wave now and we can move through them, and your chance to ask Rob questions. And if you're watching online, on Twitter, hashtag #MeetTheCEO will allow us to get your questions. Yes, first question down here.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, Rob. Jen Dullitz from Women in Banking and Finance. Bunnings is such an iconic Australian success story and strategically has taught us all in our business degrees a lot. What do you think, if you compare, for example, the Masters story from another successful Aussie icon group, the Woolworths Group, what do you think we could learn about the differences in that story strategically between the Bunnings and, let's say, the Masters story?
Well, I guess if I reflect on Bunnings' approach when a new competitor came into the market, I might just talk to that. What impressed me, and I can't take credit for it, I was in another division at the time, but I observed what was great about the Bunnings culture was their relentless focus on the customer, their absolute desire to always improve. They were never complacent. And it would have been really easy for them to say, oh, look, this new startup will never work. They won't be successful. We're just too big and too good. But there wasn't for 1 second any sense that, well, we're going to be successful just because we are big. So they were very determined, but they stayed focused on the customer. So I think that was a good learning. Look, to be open, and openness is one of our core values. We've made our own mistakes over the years, and Bunnings and the move into the UK is an example of where we don't always get it right. We do get it wrong sometimes. But I think what Bunnings what has been good about the Bunnings culture is that continual focus on improvement, and we're seeing that now under Mike Schneider's leadership. Yes, Bunnings is a successful business, but if we look at Home Depot has better stock turn, better sales density, materially better range, better e-commerce capabilities, a better commercial business. There is so much we can go after. And that's what's inspiring the Bunnings team to create the next decade of success.
We're going to go up. There was a question down the back here, but just picking up on Bunnings UK, how does a company like Wesfarmers unpack those decisions and that strategy and learn from them and apply those learnings elsewhere?
Well, look, I think it is really important to face into those issues and learn from them. I'd start by saying that the Bunnings team has delivered billions and billions of dollars of value over the years, and the team deserves a lot of credit for that. There were also some mistakes made in the UK which were very costly, but still I think when you tally up the value created by that team, they're still very well and truly in the black. I guess we did take a lot of learnings, and I've talked openly about those as Mike Schneider has. I guess what I'd like to point out though is I'm really thankful to our board that our board was prepared to actually act quickly on that. And look, it wasn't an easy process for us to go through, but we approached it in a very fact-based way, grounded in our values and in our corporate objective, and what was the best decision for our shareholders over the long term. And the best decision for our shareholders over the long term was to exit this business, if we could exit, at an appropriate price. It was a very disappointing outcome, but it was frankly the right thing to do, and it's a credit to the board that they had the confidence, I guess, and the will to actually face into a decision. Whereas a lot of other companies, and I'm sure your business school would look at plenty of examples of companies that simply aren't prepared to face into issues, and that's what's good about Wesfarmers.
Next question. There was a question up the back there. Yeah.
Hi. Firstly, thank you so much for being here tonight and sharing your learnings with us. You've mentioned a lot of really impressive men who have worked at Wesfarmers. I'm curious to know what the diversity looks like at Wesfarmers at the moment.
And you're involved with Male Champions of Change. Why don't you talk through those strategies?
That's a great question. I I should note that if I look back on my own personal career, probably remiss of me not to say this, if I think about some of the most influential people in my career, I'd point out people like Kerry Schott as being probably one of the most influential people in my career, and I worked with Kerry for many years. And within Wesfarmers, we have fantastic talent. If I look at what's going on in Wesfarmers at the moment, 45% of our leadership team are women, and that is the case because they are the best people in the role. Some of the, I guess, people I would point out that I think are ones to watch for the future. I think Sarah Hunter, the new Managing Director of Officeworks, has been on board now for nearly a year. Sarah's taking some parental leave next week. She's having her third child. I worked with Sarah at Coles. She led the demerger from the Coles side. Yeah, she's just one example of the great talent we have in Wesfarmers. Our General Counsel, Maya, is another example, as is our Company Secretary, Alex Spazeska, who's worked in various roles around the group. I could keep naming them, but if I as I start thinking about the fantastic women we have in our leadership team, the thing I think about is that I find that they have been instrumental in the changes that we've made over the last couple of years at Wesfarmers. So creating that capability at a leadership team level and throughout the organisation, I think has been one of the enablers for us driving the change that we've made in recent years. But there's still more to do.
Next question, where are we going? Was there one? Yeah, down here, thanks, yeah.
First of all, many thanks for your speech tonight. Extremely interesting, and as a shareholder, I've been very pleased with returns, so thank you very much. The question I've got is that Wesfarmers is so unique in Australia that trying to compare Wesfarmers with any other company that is doing the same kind of thing is almost impossible. I'm sure, though, that there must be companies around the world who you do compare yourselves to. I used to work for a company called General Electric, which was a very diversified company, just at the period where Jack Welch came in and came up with this way of simplifying their business, which was saying you either got to be number one or number two in your market or have a very, very good reason for not exiting. Do you have any sort of similar kind of broad or very focused strategies like that? Or is it, who do you compare yourself to?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question, and over the years we've done a lot of work looking around the world at other organisations to see what we can learn. We've spent time with Berkshire Hathaway, GE's a company that we've looked at over the years. More recently, we actually sent a team over to look at a number of Nordic conglomerates. There are some really interesting conglomerates in the Nordic region that share a lot of similarities to Wesfarmers: long-term focus, lean, corporate office, divisional autonomy focus, and they've been incredibly successful. It's interesting reflecting on GE that I remember about 14 years ago or so when I had joined the leadership team for the first time, and we had someone out from GE that was challenging us because apparently we weren't being bold enough about disruptive trends, the unstoppable trends, and we should be allocating capital towards areas that were going to have these tailwinds, and we needed to be bigger and bolder, and we needed to do this. And we struggled with that a bit because it was somewhat inconsistent with our philosophy of, well, do we think we're going to get a good return for shareholders? And almost being a bit agnostic about the industries that we invest in. So that was one interesting observation that we made from GE. They obviously did a lot of things really, really well and have been a very successful company over the years, albeit some problems nowadays. But I guess what I've learned from the conglomerates that work and those that don't, the ones that have a lean corporate office rather than empires, they tend to do better. The ones that are really controlling around capital tend to do better. And I'm inclined to think that conglomerates are one of the best ways of actually being successful in the future if you adopt that approach of allocating your capital in areas that are going to deliver good returns in the future. Whereas a lot of companies that just keep investing capital in their business because that's what they do, it might not be the right thing for shareholders. So anyway, that's some of the ways that we've thought about it.
So a question down the front here, just as we do that and reflecting on GE, when you think of artificial intelligence, you think of machine learning, do you think you're in a digital business, or does Wesfarmers become a digital business over time?
Well, I think we are on a journey to very much become a digital business and a data-driven business, and it was one of the core things I focused on when I took over as MD. I just looked around our organisation and I could see areas where we were using data analytics and digital technologies and actually creating great value. I could also see the threats from those companies that are very good in this space. But if you think about Wesfarmers, like a business like Bunnings, we have 20 million customer interactions on our website a month. We have millions and millions of customer interactions in our businesses each week. We have hundreds of millions of customer data points developed every week. Surely there's a lot we can go after there. So we are making a lot of changes there. We've built an advanced analytics centre that is working on a lot of use cases on how we better use data. We bought Catch, which is a really exciting digital e-commerce platform. And if you're not a Catch Club member, encourage you to sign up and watch this space between now and Christmas. And Bunnings has just announced the launch of MarketLink, which is going to be a fantastic proposition. And if you want any product that fits between your front gate and your back gate, Bunnings is the place for you. So digital is going to feature very, very prominently in what we do in the future.
Excellent. Christina Tonkin, ANZ. With this sort of conglomerate and the diverse businesses that Wesfarmers is in, I'm interested in how you sort of see ESG matters shaping, the future of Wesfarmers, ethical supply chain, product selection, etc. If you can comment on that.
Yeah, it's a really important part about what we do, and I should emphasise that although we are a very financially focused company, and our objective is satisfactory returns over the long term, we also say, and if you look at our annual report, you'll see it says we can only achieve that if we do a number of things. If we anticipate needs of our customers, safe working environment for our team, deal fairly and ethically with suppliers, look after the environment is a big part of it, support the communities in which we operate and operate with honesty and integrity. So the environment is a big part of it. The way we approach the ESG aspects is, first of all, make sure that we are delivering tangible outcomes around emissions reductions and improving emissions intensity. So it was really pleasing to release our sustainability portal and annual report recently that actually showed that we have been making great progress with reducing emissions. In many cases, it actually makes really good financial sense. How we're trying to position ourselves here is, I must admit, I'm really frustrated with the two extremes of the debate. On one hand, you have one extreme that says that we should turn every coal-fired power station off tomorrow. Then you have the other extreme side of the debate that denies that climate change is even an issue. And I just find that those two extremes are just both part of the problem, because whilst they are at those two extremes, nothing happens. So as a company at Wesfarmers, we are trying to, we want to be recognised by our customers, our team members, our shareholders, the community, as a company that's actually taking action. So you read our annual report, you look at our sustainability portal, and we're very proud of the actions we're taking.
Question up the back there. Yeah. Oh, the front. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, hi, Rob. Lucinda here. I too was an athlete and have experienced the transition out of sport. And what I'm really curious about is to hear your thoughts on how, 1 year out from the games and then a year, once the games is finished, how can businesses help athletes transition into sport, out of sport and into a business, and without that, technical business acumen, background and experience?
Well, it's a good question, Lucinda, and I should have noted I did start out as a sailor like Lucinda, but I wasn't any good at it, so I had to go to rowing. So, congratulations. Look, I think I think a lot of in sport, a lot of athletes go through almost a sense of depression when they finish an Olympic Games or retire from elite sport, and I think it is a real shame. You do see a lot of individuals go through real personal problems through that transition. And why it is a shame is because these people have so much to offer. So, I would encourage companies, organisations to embrace these individuals. We're certainly trying to do a lot of that in rowing to create opportunities for networking events because I think there's a lot of value that they can add. And I think also there's a lot that athletes can learn from the business sector. So, yeah, I'd encourage you all to do your bit.
I'm going to squeeze in one last question here before the clock beats us. Yes, with you.
Thank you, Rob. I'm just a student at UNSW at the moment, not an industry
Not
specialist.
just a student. You're a student at the Chancellor's. You're a student at UNSW.
Nor am I a shareholder, but I am an aspiring leader in business. And I was wondering whether or not a typical career in business and a degree in finance is the only way to get to where you're going in terms of being a leader in business or a leader in these sectors, and especially for people who are studying and still learning. Where do you recommend we focus our efforts? Should it just be in business? Could it be in other sectors? Is a business degree the only way to get there? What's your advice to someone who's aspiring to get into a position like yours?
Well, I'd probably start by saying probably doing a business or finance degree at UNSW sounds like a fantastic way to start your career. But I think what we're seeing, and certainly as an employer, we're seeing such amazing change in markets with technology. The nature of roles are fundamentally changing. So I started out in an accounting role at Wesfarmers in 1992-93. What I did back then is fundamentally different to what our accounting finance graduates are doing today. And I think it will be very different in another 5 years. So what I'd encourage people to do is if you aspire to bigger and broader roles in business, to not try and pigeonhole yourself too much. Have a very inquiring mind, learn beyond your specialty area. Often what we look at when we're trying to promote people into general manager and broader leadership roles is not how good are you as an accountant or how clever are you as a finance person, but actually, do you get the bigger picture? What experiences have you had that then shape you as a person? How effective are you at engaging people at different levels? So I think getting your degree is fantastic, but then do what you can to continually learn and develop as a person.
We're out of time. Just one last question. Australia is a conglomerate. Have you been sounded out for a political career?
No, I have zero interest in that, zero interest.
Methinks he doth protest too much. Will you thank Rob Scott? We've heard a lot about the Wesfarmers board tonight, so how appropriate we have a director from the Wesfarmers board to come and deliver the vote of thanks to Rob. Will you welcome Vanessa Wallace? Vanessa.
Thank you very much for the War of the Scots. I think it lived up to all the expectations. And thank you very much for inviting me to give the vote of thanks as well. As you heard, I'm a director of Wesfarmers, but I did start with a BCom at University of New South Wales, and I did finance, so it must have been something right there as well. I was trying to think of how to actually summarise, just an amazing list of lessons that we've heard from Rob tonight. And it struck me, and having lived in Japan for a few years, they have a tool that they use called Ikigai, which is what they call your reason for being. And it struck me that actually we could do a bit of a ikigai on Rob from tonight. Because there's three things that I think came out really, really clearly. One was aspiration. And we heard, and I'm going to check my notes because I tried to capture the actual words. We heard that his advice to us, I think, is to seek challenges and embrace them. And then to move on and seek the next challenge and embrace that. We heard that it's about finding the rhythm and that great aspiration is magnified through teamwork. We heard that actually being a great judge of talent helps with aspiration, and I'll have to let Liz know that she was mentioned, which is fantastic. And then we also heard a lot around caring, and I would say the second dimension of Ikigai for Rob is he intensely cares. And it's not just his disarming smile, which makes you think that you're going to have a very casual conversation with him, but then this intelligence just penetrates. It's also about embracing your passion. He talks to people as people, and I think one of the reasons why he's been very successful in building a more diverse team in just a short time as he's been CEO is he actually really embraces flexibility and he looks for really embedded and latent talent. Fundamentally, and I was on the board when we went through the process of selecting our CEO, and you can see that it was really solidly based in a set of values. And I think that goes to actually a really caring mentality as well. And the third part of the Ikigai, for me, that summarises Rob, is about doing. So he aspires and he cares, but it's not about words. He actually gets down to doing. He takes decisions with courage, avoids hubris. He spends time on real problems, not the things that people think he should be focused on. And he builds on his experiences, and I think the message to us is to enjoy the journey and to be active, to participate. I also think there's a few things he's told us not to focus on. Don't focus on the politics, don't catch the short-term disease, don't do things that other people think you should be seen to be doing, and most importantly, don't take yourself too seriously. So please help me, join me in thanking Rob and Mark, actually, both the Scotts.
Nice work.